He arrested his own captain because she was black, but when the video went viral she turned the whole department upside down. Before we dive into this shocking mystery, let us know where you're watching from in the comments, and if you love thrilling, jaw-dropping stories, don't forget to subscribe. Captain Naomi Bennett had always been a woman who could command a room without uttering a single word. Her presence alone sharpened by years of hard-earned authority radiated confidence and control. She had navigated the choppy waters of law enforcement as a black woman for nearly 2 decades, battling both criminals and the silent undercurrents of bias that had long plagued the force. Every stripe on her sleeve, every combination in her office had been earned through grit, intelligence, and the unrelenting resolve to make her department better, more just. But tonight she wasn't Captain Bennett. She wasn't wearing her navy blue uniform with the polished badge or the captain's bars that gleamed beneath fluorescent lights. She was just Naomi, off-duty, invisible. She thought with a faint smile. It was near dusk, and the sky outside painted itself in hues of purple, orange, and crimson, a slow-burning fire that melted into the city skyline. Naomi loved this time of day. The city's heartbeat softened, the sirens quieted, and for a fleeting moment the streets exhaled. She ambled through the narrow aisles of a small neighborhood grocery store, one she visited often for the fresh baked bread and the sense of community. Dressed in worn jeans and a green hoodie, her badge and service weapon tucked securely in her purse beneath her arm, Naomi relished the anonymity. Here no one knew her rank, no one asked for decisions that weighed heavy. She was simply a woman choosing produce, breathing in the scent of fresh herbs, and mentally crafting the meal she would share with Elena. Tonight her mind drifted as she picked up a loaf of sourdough from the local bakery shelf, imagining the conversation they'd have over dinner, the soft laughter, the warmth that counterbalanced the cold world outside. She needed that tonight. She needed the reminder that there was still space for normally, still room for love. As Naomi paid at the register, exchanging pleasantries with the cashier, her phone buzzed. A simple message from Elena: "When are you coming home?" Naomi smiled faintly, thumbs gliding quickly across the screen. "On my way now, just grabbing bread and wine. See you in 10. The automatic doors slid open and the cool evening air greeted her like an old friend. The street hummed with life, but not chaos. Cyclists zipped past, their laughter trailing behind them. A group of teenagers strolled along the sidewalk, their voices rising in animated bursts. Naomi adjusted her grocery bag over her shoulder, took a breath, and felt, if only for a moment, free. 2 blocks away, Officer Ryan Mercer sat in his squad car, restless. The day had been unremarkable. A couple of parking disputes, a noise complaint, nothing that made him feel like he was doing something, like he was making a difference. His fingers drummed anxiously against the steering wheel, eyes flickering between the quiet streets and the glowing dashboard. He lived for the adrenaline, the chase, the moments that reminded him why he signed up in the first place. When his radio crackled to life, his body snapped to attention. "All units, 1031 in progress. Robbery. Suspect black female, mid-40s. Green hoodie, dark jeans. Last seen heading west on 5th and Maple. Approach with caution." Mercer straightened in his seat, his breath quickened. Finally, he thought. His fingers tightened around the steering wheel. A robbery suspect on the loose, and she wasn't far. His heartbeat accelerated, his mind sharpening. This was his moment to step up, to take action. "Unit 17, I'm in the area." Responding, he said, grabbing the radio with too much force. He made a sharp turn down Maple, headlights cutting across the dimming street. The adrenaline washed over Mercer, blurring his focus. His eyes darted across the sidewalk, fed, scanning every shadow, every passer. By then, he saw her walking casually, bag of groceries in hand, green hoodie pulled over her head against the cooling air, black mid-40s jeans. The description ticked every box. It didn't matter that Naomi Bennett's pace was leisurely, her shoulders relaxed. It didn't matter that there was no sign of urgency, no trace of the fear or haste that usually accompanied guilt. To Mercer, this was it. His instinct screamed that she was the one, and that was all he needed. The squad car slowed, creeping behind her like a predator eyeing its prey. Naomi remained blissfully unaware, her mind still on Elena, on dinner, on peace. The moments snapped in two when a voice, sharp and authoritative, rang out behind her. "Ma'am, stop right there." The words hit Naomi like a cold slap. She turned slowly, blinking against the glare of the headlights now trained on her like interrogative spotlights. Her heartbeat stumbled. She squinted, her mind racing to understand. Was there trouble nearby? And, "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her tone calm but edged with confusion. Mercer didn't hear her. Not really. His hand hovered near his Holstered weapon, his posture tensed as though she might bolt at any moment. The description played on loop in his head. Black female, green hoodie, jeans, hands where I can see them. Naomi froze, her mouth parting as shock rippled through her. She'd dealt with tense confrontations before, dozens of them, but never on this side of the command. The part of her that had been trained to de-escalate screamed at her to comply, to stay calm, but another part, deeper and older, felt a familiar sting. She was a black woman on the street. That's all Mercer saw. "I'm Captain Naomi Bennett, 4th Precinct," she said, her voice steady, firm. "I'm a police officer." But Mercer's vision tunneled, his pulse thundered in his ears. "Captain? Yeah, right, heard that story before. Just another suspect trying to talk her way out of it." He edged closer, hands where I can see them now, he barked again. Naomi's breath caught, her hands rose slowly, palms open. "Officer, listen to me, my badge is in my purse. I am not." Mercer surged forward, grabbing her arm, spinning her around with practiced force. The grocery bag tumbled, sourdough splitting across the pavement like a broken symbol of her stolen piece. Her purse hit the ground, spilling its contents, including her badge, which glinted beneath the streetlight. Ignored, cold steel clamped around Naomi's wrists tighter than necessary. Her heart raced, indignation surging through her veins as Mercer muttered something about following protocol. She wanted to scream, to lash out, but the weight of every black body cuffed unjustly before her pressed down on her chest. She knew the cost of resistance. "Officer Mercer," she shouted, her voice straining against the tightening cuffs. "My badge is right there, look at it." But Mercer was already leading her to the squad car, ignoring the grocery bag. "The badge, the truth." Naomi felt the eyes of bystanders, felt their phones capturing every second of her humiliation. Another black woman cuffed and hauled away. She sank into the back seat of the cruiser, the doors slamming shut, her reflection fractured in the rearview mirror. The city lights blurred as tears burned hot behind her eyes, but she blinked them back. She couldn't cry, not now, not yet, but the weight in her chest felt suffocating. She was Captain Naomi Bennett, a woman who'd given her life to this department, to justice, but none of that mattered when she was black and wearing a hoodie. The storm had begun. The cool metal of the squad car's interior wrapped around Naomi Bennett like a prison, suffocating in its indifference. She sat rigid, hands cuffed tightly behind her wrists, aching beneath the unforgiving steel. The once familiar hum of a police cruiser now felt foreign, hostile. She had spent years riding in these vehicles, giving commands from the front seat, leading officers like Ryan Mercer into dangerous situations, but tonight those seats, those walls, that badge, it all meant nothing. She wasn't Captain Bennett, she wasn't respected, she was just another black woman hauled into custody, another suspect robbed of dignity. The car rocked gently as Mercer turned a corner, his grip firm on the wheel, jaw clenched. Naomi could see him through the rearview mirror, his eyes flicking between the road and her reflection. No recognition, no remorse, just the tight-lipped determination of a man who believed he was doing the right thing. "He thinks he's the hero," Naomi thought bitterly, her throat tightening as the full weight of the situation pressed down on her chest. Her badge, a symbol of everything she had worked for, lay back on the sidewalk beside scattered groceries, as meaningless in that moment as the title. She had earned this. "Can't be happening, not to me, not after all I've given." She leaned forward against the hard plastic divider separating her from Mercer, her voice slicing through the tense silence. "Officer Mercer, you're making a mistake. Look at me, I'm Captain Naomi Bennett. I work at the 4th Precinct. My badge was in my purse." Mercer's grip tightened on the wheel, his knuckles widened. "You can explain that at booking," he muttered without looking back. Naomi's blood boiled, but she forced her voice to stay steady. She knew the rules, knew how quickly these situations could spiral, but the calm professional tone she had mastered over the years cracked beneath the weight of humiliation. "You don't even know who I am, do you?" she snapped, her eyes burning holes into the back of his head. "I've been on this force longer than you've been out of college." Still Mercer wouldn't meet her gaze. He stared straight ahead, his face a mask of detached professionalism masking the turmoil beneath. He had convinced himself she was a suspect, a threat. To admit he was wrong now would unravel the narrative. He clung to the story of the vigilant officer bringing in a dangerous criminal, but Naomi wouldn't let him bury this. "You didn't even check my ID. She see that you cuffed me like a common thug. Do you even realize what you've done?" The cruiser slowed, pulling into the precinct's rear lot. The familiar brick building, once a place of purpose and pride for Naomi, now loomed like a fortress designed to break her. Her heart pounded against her ribcage as the reality sank deeper. She was about to be walked into her own precinct, past her own colleagues in handcuffs. Mercer finally turned his head slightly, just enough to glare at her over his shoulder. "Save it?" he muttered. "You fit the Description: I followed procedure. The word scraped against Naomi's ears like sandpaper. Procedure was a shield officers used to justify anything. Procedure said black women in hoodies fit the description. Procedure said assuming the worst kept you alive. Get out, Mercer ordered, yanking the door open. Naomi stepped out stiffly, her shoulders square, head held high. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her crumble as they crossed the lot. Naomi could feel eyes on her, officers pausing in their tasks, curious glances flickering her way, whispers followed in their wake. She could feel the heat of those stares, the weight of the cameras on the surrounding buildings capturing every degrading second. Her colleagues, the men and women she had trained, mentored, worked alongside, now watched as she was led inside like a criminal. Her boots echoed across the tiled floor of the intake area, each step a drum beat of shame. Mercer guided her to a bench near, processing, snapping one cuff off but keeping the other fastened to a metal ring on the wall. Stay there, he barked, already turning to grab paperwork. Naomi sat, the cold steel biting into her wrist, fire in her veins. She scanned the room, taking in the faces of the officers. Present, some familiar, some younger recruits she hadn't yet met. Sergeant Travis Monroe stood by the counter mid-con conversation with another officer, his head jerked up, confusion flickering across his face as he spotted Naomi. Captain Bennett, he blurted, disbelief saturating his voice. Mercer's pen froze mid-stroke, eyes narrowing as he turned. Monroe moved quickly, closing the distance. What the hell is going on here? Naomi's voice shook with restrained fury. Why don't you ask Officer Mercer here? Monroe's gaze snapped to Mercer, his expression darkening. Mercer, she matched the suspect's description, Mercer said defensively, his grip tightening around the paperwork. She's our captain. Monroe barked, eyes wide. You didn't recognize her? Mercer faltered for the first time, his shoulders tensing as cracks formed in his confidence. She said that, but I mean the description matched. I was following protocol. Naomi yanked at the cuff binding her wrist. Get this off me, she growled. Monroe reached for the key at his belt, unlocking her restraint with a flick of his wrist. Naomi rubbed at the red marks the cuffs left behind, her eyes burning holes into Mercer's skull. I told you who I was. I showed you my badge. You didn't listen, she spat, standing slowly, her hands shaking from the surge of adrenaline. You saw my skin in a hoodie and decided that was enough. The room fell into a tense silence. Mercer stood frozen, the weight of his mistake pressing down like a storm cloud. Monroe turned to him, his voice tight. You better tell me you called this in before bringing her here. Mercer's face palled. I didn't. I was sure. The description, Naomi stepped in, her voice rising, commanding the room. You didn't even radio it, and you just assumed, dragged me in here without a second thought. Her voice echoed, bouncing off the walls, the tremor of outrage filling every corner. Officers from nearby desks had risen now, the realization spreading like wildfire. Naomi advanced on Mercer, stopping inches from his face. You cuffed your captain in front of this entire city. That's going viral already, I promise you, but you know what scares me more than what you did to me? She leaned in, eyes narrowing. How many times you've done this to people who couldn't speak for themselves, who didn't have a badge to pull? Mercer's mouth opened, but no words came. Monroe's voice broke the silence. Chief Aldridge needs to hear about this now. Naomi didn't flinch, didn't wait for Mercer's pathetic defense. She turned, walking away from the bench, from the restraints, from the officer who had stripped her of dignity. But the fight wasn't over, it was just beginning. The cold walls of the precinct seemed to close in tighter with every second. Naomi Bennett sat on that bench, her wrist still raw from the cuffs that had bound her, the echoes of her humiliation still reverberating through her chest. She rubbed at the red marks absently, but the sting beneath her skin wasn't just physical, it was deeper, burrowed into the marrow of her bones. No matter how many times she tried to steady her breathing, the rage kept rising, hot and bitter at the back of her throat. She wasn't just a captain humiliated by one of her own, she was another black woman reduced to a suspect. In the blink of an eye across the intake room, the officers who had witnessed the ordeal still hovered. Some whispered behind cupped hands, others stared openly, their faces twisted with a cocktail of disbelief and discomfort. The stares were sharp. Is it true? Did Officer Mercer really cuff her? The disbelief that she, Captain Naomi Bennett, had been dragged in like a criminal spread through the room like wildfire, but no one stepped forward, no one offered more than glances. They all knew the weight of what had happened, but the machinery of silence had already started its work, and outside those walls the fire was already raging. Naomi's arrest, captured on shaky cell phone footage, had begun its relentless march through the digital veins of social Media. The clip was less than 2 minutes long but devastating in its clarity. Mercer barking orders at her, wrenching her arms behind her back, ignoring the badge that spilled from her purse and gleamed beneath the street lights. The caption beneath the video did the rest. Black police captain arrested by her own officer. Mistaken identity or racial profiling. Within minutes the outrage ignited. Twitter exploded. Hashtag Surge justice for Naomi. Racial bias in blue. Say her name. The footage played over and over, dissected frame by frame, every moment of Mercer's indifference amplified by righteous fury. Commentators, activists, citizens, they saw what had happened before the department even issued a statement. Inside the precinct, Naomi could feel it, the vibrations of the storm gathering beyond the brick walls. Her phone, retrieved from her purse, lay silent on the bench beside her. She couldn't bring herself to look at it. She knew the messages were pouring in. Elena would have seen the video. The community leaders she worked with, the neighborhood watch groups, the youth organizations she helped establish, they were all watching the footage of their captain being treated like another criminal. It should have crushed her, but instead something burned inside her chest, something fierce. Let them see. The door to the intake room creaked open. Sergeant Travis Monroe entered again, his face pale, jaw tight, as though holding back the weight of the moment. His phone buzzed in his hand, the screen lit with notifications. He barely had time to speak before another officer burst in behind him, his words tripping over themselves. Sergeant, the chief's office is blowing up. Calls from the mayor's office, news outlets, it's everywhere. Monroe's face tightened. He turned to Naomi, locking eyes with her, seeing the storm reflected back at him. It's gone viral, Captain. Naomi didn't blink. Good. Monroe hesitated. The chief wants to meet with you. He wants to talk about how we're going to handle this. Naomi pushed herself up from the bench, standing tall despite the weight pressing down on her chest. She straightened her sweatshirt, the green fabric wrinkled from the struggle, her dignity frayed but unbroken. I'll talk to the chief, she said, her voice steady, a low fire beneath the surface, but not before you bring Mercer in here right now. Monroe's eyes flickered, uncertainty dancing at the edges of his resolve. Captain, I now. Naomi barked, the command cutting sharper than any blade. The weight of her words left no room for argument. Monroe nodded, retreating back through the door, leaving Naomi alone with her thoughts. She inhaled deeply, the air sharp in her lungs. She could almost hear the protest beginning to swell outside. The city would not let this die quietly. Minutes later, Mercer appeared, his uniform stiff, his face pale, eyes flicking around the room like a man looking for an escape route. He stood awkwardly across from Naomi, unsure of whether to meet her gaze. His hands twitched at his sides, the facade of the proud officer slipping with every passing second. You know what's happening outside? Naomi asked, her voice calm but deadly precise. Mercer nodded faintly. I've seen the video. Do you understand what you've done? Mercer swallowed hard. It wasn't intentional. I thought I was. Naomi stepped forward, cutting the distance between them. You thought you were following protocol. You thought I was just another black woman in a hoodie who fit your idea of what a suspect looks like. You didn't think twice when I told you who I was. You didn't care. Mercer's breath quickened, his composure faltering. Every second of that video is being played on every screen in this city right now, Naomi continued, her voice rising, and it's not just about me, it's about every single black man and woman you've stopped because they fit the description. It's about every time your protocol put someone like me in cuffs instead of asking questions. Mercer's mouth opened, but no words came out. Naomi could see it, the realization dawning, the fear settling in, not for her but for himself, the backlash, the consequences, the shame. The door opened again. Monroe returned, his face tense. Captain, Chief Aldridge is ready to see you. Naomi didn't move at first. She let her eyes linger on Mercer a moment longer, watching him wilt beneath the weight of what he had done. This isn't over, she said coldly, not by a long shot. As Monroe led her toward the chief's office, Naomi caught a glimpse of the precinct's entrance through the glass windows. A crowd had gathered outside, protesters pressed against the barricades hastily erected along the sidewalk. Signs waved in the air, and racial profiling, justice for Naomi who protects us from you. Their chants echoed through the streets, growing louder, more defiant. Naomi's pulse quickened, not from fear but from resolve. Her humiliation had been public. The department had stripped her of dignity in front of the world, but now the world was watching them. She stepped into Chief Aldridge's office, ready to face the next battle because the fight had just begun. The walls of Chief Aldridge's office felt closer than Naomi Bennett remembered, like the very air inside had thickened with the weight of denial and decades of unchecked bias. The chief's polished desk gleamed beneath the overhead lights, the neat stacks of paperwork, commendations, and family photos all arranged with Clinical precision, but that veneer of order couldn't conceal the chaos rowing outside the precinct or the mounting storm crashing through the department's walls. Naomi stood across from Aldrich. Her shoulders squared, her heart pounding beneath the worn green fabric of her hoodie, refusing to let the weight of the last hour bend her. Aldrich sat behind the desk, his face worn, his eyes darting. Between Naomi and the buzzing phone on his desk calls he wasn't answering, his jaw was clenched tight, sweat gathering at his temple, though his uniform remained immaculate. He leaned back in his chair, but the illusion of control was gone. "I've got the mayor calling every 5 minutes. Aldrich began, voice rough, trying and failing to mask the tension coiling through his words. City Hall's in panic mode. They've seen the video. Naomi crossed her arms, feeling the scabs forming around her dignity, raw and exposed. Everyone's seen the video, chief. That's the point. Aldrich's eyes softened, his hands steepled beneath his chin. I know this is unacceptable, but we've got to be smart about how we handle this. The mayor doesn't want this turning into a circus." Naomi let out a hollow laugh, the sound slicing through the thick air like a blade. "A circus? That's what you're worried about." I was cuffed and dragged into my own precinct by an officer who didn't even bother to check my ID. "You think this is about optics?" The chief flinched but held his ground. "It's about the department's future, Naomi. We have to contain this before it takes the whole damn place down." Naomi stepped closer, leaning her hands onto his desk, her voice low and burning. "The department's future. I am the department. I've given everything to this place, and you know what? I'm starting to wonder if any of it mattered, because when it came down to it, I was just another black woman in a hoodie to one of my own." Aldrich's face flushed. He dropped his eyes to the desk as if avoiding the truth could erase it. His hands fidgeted with the corner of a file as though paperwork could offer protection from the truth clawing at his conscience. Outside, the chants of the protesters were growing louder, their voices pressing against the brick and glass. "Justice for Naomi, end racial profiling." The cries felt like thunder in Naomi's veins, a rising tide that could not be ignored. Aldrich finally looked up, weariness etched in every line of his face. "Mercer will be suspended pending investigation. I'll release a statement, acknowledge the mistake, and we'll set up sensitivity training. That's the best we can do right now." Naomi straightened, her pulse drumming hard against her ribs. "That's not enough." The chief's brow furrowed. "Naomi, think about the department, think about the officers." "I am thinking about them," Naomi cut in, her voice sharp, trembling with the weight of her fury. "I'm thinking about every officer of color who walks into this building wondering if they'll be next. I'm thinking about every black kid in this city who sees that video and knows damn well that a badge won't save them from a cop who can't see past the color of their skin." Aldrich's hands dropped flat onto the desk, the fight draining from his posture. "You're asking for a war, Naomi." Naomi's eyes didn't waver. "Maybe it's time we had one." The door to the office creaked open and Sergeant Monroe's tense face appeared. "Chief, Captain, the press is outside. They're demanding a statement." Aldrich groaned, leaning back, the pressure of the moment pressing into the creases of his face. "Tell them we'll release something soon." But Naomi shook her head. "Number, I'll speak to them both." Men turned to her, alarm flashing in Aldrich's eyes. "Naomi, that's exactly what needs to happen," she snapped. "I'm not hiding, not for you, not for the mayor." Monroe gave her a quiet nod, a flicker of respect passing between them before he stepped back out. Aldrich leaned forward, voice lower now, the desperation bleeding through. "Naomi, we need to control the narrative." Naomi's hands curled into fists. "Number, we need to tell the truth." The chief exhaled sharply, but Naomi was already moving, her mind a flurry of emotions, anger, humiliation, purpose, all swirling together into something that felt like resolve. She wasn't going to let them smooth over what had happened. This wasn't just her story, this was the story of everyone who had ever been profiled, cuffed, silenced because of what they looked like, and now the world was watching. As Naomi stepped into the hallway, the precinct was buzzing, officers clustered in small groups, their voices hushed, eyes flicking toward her. As she passed, some held pity in their stares, others couldn't meet her gaze. She felt their discomfort, their guilt, their complicity clinging to the air like smoke, but she walked through it, head high, shoulders squared. When she pushed through the front doors of the precinct, the roar of the crowd outside surged like a tidal wave. Protesters lined the streets, their signs raised high, their voices unified in rage and defiance. The cameras turned instantly, their lenses capturing every step she took. Naomi stopped at the barricades, her chest tightening as she faced the sea of faces. And for the first time since Mercer's handcuffs closed around her wrists, she felt something other than helplessness. She felt the power of being seen as the reporters surged forward, microphones extended, questions fired like bullets. Naomi raised her hand. "I'll speak," she said, her voice steady, commanding the crowd hushed, waiting. Naomi's eyes swept across the reporters. The protesters, the officers who had followed her outside. She felt the eyes of the city on her, the weight of every black man, woman, and child who had ever been silenced by the same system she had sworn to uphold. I am Captain Naomi Bennett, she began, her voice steady but full of fire. I was wrongfully arrested by one of my own officers because he couldn't see past the color of my skin, because a hoodie and dark jeans were enough to turn me into a suspect. But this isn't just about me, this is about a department, a system that allows this to happen. The crowd stirred, the chants swelling again. The cameras caught every word, every flicker of rage in her eyes. I am not here to smooth this over, Naomi continued. I am here to demand accountability, not just for the officer who cuffed me, but for every policy, every bias, every failure that let it happen. I will not let this moment be another headline that fades away. The protesters erupted, their chants louder, fiercer. Naomi felt the power shift. She wasn't just the woman in the cuffs anymore, she was the one leading the charge. The precinct hallways, once Naomi Bennett's place of leadership and respect, now felt foreign, charged with tension as she strode toward the small briefing room where Officer Ryan Mercer waited. Every step echoed off the cold linoleum, a rhythmic drum beat of her growing fury. She had walked these halls for years, given her heart to this department, mentored officers, fought for reforms that only ever scratched the surface, but tonight none of that mattered. Her own badge couldn't shield her from the truth that sat heavy in her chest. To Mercer, she was never Captain Bennett, she was just another black woman who fit the description. The door creaked as Naomi entered, the sharp fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across Mercer's face. He sat rigid at the table, his posture defensive, arms crossed tightly over his chest, eyes trained on the surface in front of him like a child awaiting punishment. But this wasn't about discipline, this was about accountability, and Naomi had no intention of letting him squirm away beneath a shallow apology. She closed the door behind her, the click loud in the silence between them. For a moment she stood still, letting Mercer feel the weight of her presence, the very authority he had ignored out on the street. His jaw twitched, his eyes briefly flickering toward her before darting away as if unable to hold her gaze for more than a heartbeat. Look at me, Officer Mercer. Naomi's voice sliced through the room, steady but trembling at the edges with suppressed rage. Mercer's shoulders stiffened. He lifted his head slowly, meeting her eyes, though his own burned with the kind of regret